Welcome back, everyone, to the Topical Minds podcast. I'm your host, Abdullah Khalifado, and on today's episode, I am joined by Hamza Khan. Hamza is a multi-award-winning marketer, best-selling author of the Burnout Gamble, global keynote speaker, and accomplished entrepreneur. He has been featured by Vice, Bloomberg TV, and CBC, and is regularly invited by leading organizations, including Microsoft and Salesforce, to speak on subjects such as how to build digital communities, the impact of personal branding, how to master productivity, and how to build resilience. Hamza, I don't think I did justice to everything that you have either accomplished or are currently involved in, so I apologize, but super excited to have you on, and welcome.
Oh man, you're very kind. Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. It's always surreal to hear myself reflected back at me. So thank you for that. That was really cool. It's like a confirmation. I must be doing something right if I'm on the Topical Minds podcast. I'm just really excited to also catch up with you, man. It was a big fight weekend. And I don't know if we're going to be able to cover that in the podcast. We might have to save it for another show or the after show. Don't know, but I'll take your lead, sir. Wherever you want to go, wherever I can be of value to you and to the listeners, I'm here.
So first of all, the pleasure is all mine. And for the Topical Minds podcast to have you on, clearly we're doing something right? So I just wanted to put that out there. And yes, big fight weekend. I did watch the fights. Happy to get into it. But before that, I think it would be extremely beneficial for the audience to just hear about your journey. Of course, you've accomplished a ton of success, and you're continuing your journey, and you're doing so many different things, and you seem to be doing them all really well. What was it that started it all for you? Was it a single experience? I know previously when we spoke, I remember when it came to the speaking side of it, you had you had spoken at the university, and that sort of led to what was to follow. But what motivated you to get into the speaking, and writing? And there's so many things you're involved in, but what was it that started it?
You know what? I'm glad you asked that question. I haven't had a chance to really unpack that answer with the lens of what my current set of occupations are, my portfolio of work is, if you will. Okay, so I'll try to give you the Coles Notes version over here. So think back to my post-secondary experience, an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, a very disengaged student. I think a lot of that had to do with culture clash. Born to immigrant parents, they wanted me typically to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. That was their hope for me. Very well-intentioned, but didn't quite sync up with my lived experience and being born in New York and being surrounded by the bright lights, the big city, all the arts and entertainment. My uncles who got me into hip hop and wrestling. I was very much a creative kid. I wanted to express myself creatively. I picked up this whole spectrum of marketing and communications tools, and I didn't know that they could conveniently fall within that category. I learned how to do graphic design, web design, photography, videography. I loved picking up the family camcorder and making skits and music video remakes. I was that kid growing up. So anyways, I found myself in this place of cognitive dissonance while I was studying at the University of Toronto in this program that I didn't feel passionate about, in these classes where I just wasn't connecting with the subject matter, and I would show up to class late, I would leave early. I was that guy, and I was falling out of the university experience gradually. My grades slipped from B's to C's and D's, and before I knew it, I was on the brink of actually dropping out and failing out, flunking out essentially. And things turned around for me when I was walking through a hallway that I had walked through maybe hundreds, if not thousands of times at the student center. And I was dejected. I was approaching my fourth year, and I passed by a poster that was so well designed, 11 by 17, and it said, "What's next?" in Technicolor, and it just spoke to me. It made me stop for a fraction of a millisecond longer than I normally would have. And that, to me, was my first real powerful, visceral engagement with the power of marketing. And it made me, it intercepted me on my user journey, as we call it in marketing. And I attended the leadership workshop on the other side of that promotion. And that's where I met a friend and a mentor, Drew Dudley, who told me that you don't just go to college, you don't just go to university, post-secondary to get a degree, to get a job. You go there to grow holistically. Personal, professional, and academic development is what you're hoping for. It's a crucible of citizenship. And my jaw dropped. I went back to my dad and I said, "Dad, I'm going to drop out of this program. I'm going to switch. I'm going to go into English instead of business and poli-sci, and I have a shot at becoming a good, if not great marketer versus a mediocre lawyer." He wasn't thrilled when he heard that. That's another story for another time. But anyways, I went all in with my dreams of activating at that point one part of a two-part equation, which is your vocation and your industry. I knew my vocation was to be something in the creative industries, marketing, communication, writing, teaching, speaking. There was something there. I wanted to express myself, but where I wanted to express myself, what industry, that was still up in the air. And when I graduated, I worked at the university and I really enjoyed that experience, but then I was asked to spread my wings, leave the university and see if there's a place outside of here that you can really find yourself and find your application. I dabbled in the music industry, in tech startups as a freelancer, but my heart came back to the end goal within post-secondary. The feeling that I felt hearing Drew Dudley speak to me and how transformative that was for me, I wanted to recreate that effect time and again for as many students as possible. I wanted to help students that were falling through the cracks to emerge and to break through whatever plateaus they were on in their respective student and even broader hero's journey. So fast forward, I end up working at Ryerson University. Then I start my own agency, Splash Effect, concurrently. And at the time, we were doing some pretty pioneering work with regards to building social community for students in Canada within the post-secondary environment. And I got asked to do a couple of speeches. At first, it happened with a roadshow within the institution. It's like, hey, Hamza, tell other departments at this organization at Ryerson how it was that you were able to build this Facebook community. Or, teach us about Twitter at the time. How do we use hashtags strategically to draw more attention to our events and whatnot. And I was terrified, man. I would do these short 2 to 3 minute talks, and I'd have the paper in front of me the whole time, and I would just look up and recite very quickly and look back down, and my heart would beat out of my chest, and I would be absolutely mortified by the prospect of it, and I would be exhausted once these 2 to 3 minute talks were done. And I had several great mentors, Leslie D'Souza, Glenn Wepler, John Austin, Rachel Barreca, who all were very supportive of me throughout this entire journey and asked me to step further and further outside of my comfort zone. They would say, Hamza, the next time you do this, no paper. Hamza, the next time you do this, instead of 3 minutes, do 5 minutes. Hey, Hamza, that 5 minute, can you turn that into a 30 minute and present at this conference? And it was just this gradual process of stepping outside of my comfort zone, articulating the things that I was doing behind the scenes, developing the confidence through the competence, and the stages gradually increased in scope, in size, and also in terms of stakes. And I'll never forget the first time I was asked to do a keynote after having done workshops and panels, not just within Ontario, but across the country. And even in the States, somebody, Rudra Prasad, offered me my first keynote opportunity. He said, Hamza, the thing that you've been doing, can you do this for an audience of high school students? Can you teach them how can they brand themselves online and access the hidden job market using social media? And I said, all right, I'm up for the challenge. Let's do it. And that started the process of me being where I'm at today, in sync with the description that you provided earlier, the global keynote speaker and whatnot. So that's how the journey began. It started with this confluence of marketing, communication, education. So that's the vocation, that's the industry. But through that process, having the community that saw that I had something worth sharing, and they gave me opportunity after opportunity to test myself, to grow as a speaker, to find my voice, and that brought me into the arena, if you will. Sorry, that was a really long answer, man, but
no,
I wanted to give you the full breadth.
The full context? No, that was a great response. And what led to you becoming an author? Was it your interactions along the way with individuals? Was it a personal experience? And I'm referring to the Burnout Gamble book. So
Specifically,
what?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was always a writer. I was blogging avidly. I was using social media a lot more than I use it these days. I had a newsletter going on. I was contributing to a bunch of publications. I like to tell people that I'm very flattered when people define me as a speaker, but I think that my hip pocket skill, the thing that I'm the most proud of, is my writing. I think of myself as a writer before I think of myself as anything else. And in order to be a good speaker, I contend that you have to be a good writer, because writing allows you to organize your thoughts. If reading is breathing in, then writing is breathing out. So I have always been a writer. It's how I've expressed myself. I think my personality combination lends itself well as a very socially awkward, shy introvert. I found a lot of solace in writing. It's how I engage with my own thoughts. It's how I was able to process a lot of things that were happening in my life that continue to happen till this day, that's how I also sort of engage with my own thoughts and engage with the world at large. The Burnout Gamble came about because in 2014, I suffered a really crushing bout of occupational burnout. I went through a really, and that was the last time, knock on wood, that I experienced burnout of that scale. When I went through that, I was completely bewildered. I couldn't understand why this had happened to me. And, in trying to find out answers to what had happened to me that had led me to publicly burn out and burn bridges along the way, and then also as a way to heal from that experience, I found that journaling was really helpful. So the Burnout Gamble began as a process of, first of all, taking notes from all the research that I was doing while I was at home, sick, alone, bedridden, bewildered. So A, I was capturing notes, and then B, I was also journaling about my experience. And then as I, went through a couple of months of this, I took a step back and I looked at what I had been accumulating thus far and been producing, and that was like a synthesis of this problem that I didn't think enough people were talking about, both in terms of frequency and volume. And then there was also this very personal story about, almost like an Icarus-like story, this person that flew too close to the sun and then burned out. And I thought to myself, wow, we have a problem, and then we have lived experience. How many other people are going through this? And as I went through what began as sort of like this half-assed internet research, then turned into me bringing on a team, bringing on some academics, and then putting together this full court press to try to understand how people burn out and what they can do to beat burnout and build resilience. It was only natural then a book was to take shape, because at that point I think I'd written naturally through this organic process of taking notes and then documenting my experience around 200 pages. And I thought to myself, well, this can't be a blog post. This has to be a book. And let me put this together, and let me put this together as soon as possible, because this is a problem. We're essentially sitting on a ticking time bomb. And I didn't seek to become the burnout expert or to write about burnout. In fact, I got cold feet so many times throughout that process. Talking about your failures, talking about the fact that you burned out, especially if you take great pride and your identity is shaped around being productive, didn't seem like the best branding tool. And I was essentially the Burnout Gamble is an admission to the rest of the world that I burned out, that I couldn't hack it, that for some reason I can't be trusted with high octane work. And that's how I mistakenly felt at the outset of the project. But here I am nearly 8 years later, and I'm so glad that I did it. It's one of the best things that I ever did. And not just for myself, for the countless people who write to me till this day, and tell me that they have benefited tremendously. In fact, one of my life coaches now, an executive coach, she literally said verbatim on LinkedIn, Hamza, your book saved my life, and I'll never forget that. I'll never forget reading that. Another person on another part of the world, she's in Germany, telling me, your book saved my life. And, that brought me to tears. I'm getting shivers just thinking about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it must be amazing to get that response, right? At the end of the day, like that's what, individuals as content creators look to get, is that type of reaction. I have so many questions, but the one that I have that I'd like to ask you first, as you were going through this, the one thing that stood out to me, and I can see that being a problem that a lot of people experience, and that's as you experience burnout, or as you're in the process of experiencing burnout, you can at times burn bridges. And what was that like for you? Was that an issue that you were having with individuals that you were working with? Was it a byproduct of perhaps your mood not being, the most positive, or you being in the most happy state? What contributed to that? And how do you advise people to perhaps avoid that?
Such a great question, man. And it's very cathartic for me to share this answer. So thank you for asking that. And I also realize that I do this thing where I get in my own head and I think out loud and I speak. I sort of attach words to my thoughts. And so they're not coming out in very coherent, at times, media-friendly sound bites. So I'll try my best to sort of focus my answers and keep things on track and keep them succinct over here. But if you want me to just go James Joyce, Kanye West,
do it.
Stream of consciousness, I'm happy to do that too. Whatever you think the audience wants.
Do it.
Let's start over here. I think that I burned out at a very unique point in the evolution of burnout as a discussion, as a topic. Now it's in the lexicon. Now we talk about self-care and holistic wellness and well-being, emotional, physical, mental well-being as part of this holistic well-being endeavor. Now burnout has become mainstream again. And Dr. Christina Maslach, who's considered by I would say most people in the industry, and I don't know what industry I'm talking about specifically. Like, there's no real burnout industry, but positive psychology, well-being, burnout, stress, that nebulous industry she's considered to be one of the pioneers of burnout research. And she said that burnout, comes in and out of vogue and, disappears for a little while, then it comes back in. And now here we are 2 years into the pandemic. My goodness, has it been? Yeah, 20 months, nearly 2 years into the pandemic. And she says that burnout is back. Burnout is fashionable all over again. And I was writing about it at a time when it wasn't in the lexicon. And I don't like using this word in my case because there are some real victims of burnout over there. I'm very lucky to have escaped with my health and well-being intact. But I went through it at a time when there was a shift taking place. And that shift was this. I was on the tail end of hustle culture that you and I both experienced. You think about the Gary V, early 2010s talking about, I'll sleep when I die, #hustle, and all of the other toxic expressions of that startup ethos that characterized the 2010s. I was at the tail end of that and at the beginning of the discussions around wellness, self-care, and well-being. So when I burned out, number one, I didn't know what was happening to me. It felt like stress. And by the time I realized I was burning out, or the time that I realized that I had burned out completely, I had been in that cycle for months at that point, for a lot longer. And the people around me didn't have the concepts or the vocabulary to express to me what was happening to me and how I was impacting them. I didn't have the conceptual understanding and the frameworks and the vocabulary to understand what was happening to myself. So on the surface, it looked like Hamza had checked out. Hamza was disengaged. Hamza was maybe depressed. Hamza was phoning it in. Hamza was dropping the ball. So the interpretation of what was happening on the surface was fair, but deep down there was a whole host of systemic factors that were leading me to falling apart. And it wasn't just happening in the realm of work. It was happening in my social life. It was happening in my family life. It was happening physically to me. And the reason why those bridges were burned is because we didn't communicate. Nobody spoke honestly and openly and with any certainty about what was happening. I couldn't tell my team and my colleagues what was happening, and they couldn't tell me what they thought was happening. So it was a culture problem. It was a vocabulary problem. We were all steeped in a level of ignorance that I'm trying so hard every single day as an author, speaker, and now even a researcher on burnout to change. I want to make it such that everybody in the world has the ability to distinguish between run-of-the-mill stress and occupational burnout, is able to understand the upstream factors that influence burnout, to understand the factors from without, the exogenous, outside of our control factors that preheat society for burnout. And that's what I'm really intent on doing, is to try to prevent my situation from happening at scale. And unfortunately, I can't work fast enough. It is, in the words of the World Health Organization, stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century. Last I checked, the United Nations said that annually 2.8 million people die every year. Yeah, 2.8 million people die annually from work-related stress, which is surreal to me, because if you extrapolate that over 2 years, that's twice the amount of COVID deaths. But do we hear about this in the news? Nothing.
That's insane. And how bad do you think it's going to get? Like, how bad do you think the burnout situation is going to get? Or do you think as though organizations are taking the right steps to mitigate it?
That's a great question. So I have my feet in both. I have one foot in the optimist world, one foot in the pessimist world. But not necessarily the pessimist. I would say the realist world. In the realist world, I believe that we're not having enough conversations about what is good for business, what is good for work, and what is good for the populace as a whole. I think we're getting hung up on conversations about hybrid work, time theft, the great resignation, the big quit, all these really trendy symptoms of a deeper problem. We're treating the symptoms, but we're not looking at underlying sickness. And the underlying sickness, in my opinion, is a lack of critical thought, collective either reluctance or inability to ask the bigger questions about why we're working the way that we work. Why is the workday still 8 hours a day? Why is it Monday to Friday? Why are people expected to be in an office? Like these are questions that deserve critical thought, but we're rushing to their pandemic influenced solutions. And again, we're getting hung up on the wrong things, in my opinion. So the realist side of me says that this problem is going to get worse because we're not asking the right questions. We're not addressing the root problems. The optimist, however, is seeing a great awakening taking place. So like the great resignation, or aka the big quit, for me is very interesting because even with the wage subsidies ending, people are still choosing not to come back to work. They're choosing to leave organizations. And this is the mistake that some leaders are making. They're not quitting the job. They're quitting you. They're quitting the leader. And the sooner leadership as an apparatus, as a larger apparatus, can clue into that, I think we're going to get the answer to how we can, I'm trying to remove the violence from my language. I'm going to say to kill two birds with one stone, but maybe feed two birds with one stone. That's what I've been taught to say. It's a more neutral way to describe the outcome over here. If we can clue into the fact that a leadership reinvention is needed, a complete overhaul of the way that we lead, I think that not only can we address the underlying stress problem, but we can use the pandemic as an opportunity to shape a new paradigm, a new epoch of work that is more human-centric, one that doesn't see human beings as mere human resources, that treats them as something so much more than that. It treats them as human beings who happen to work, not workers who happen to be human.
And what would that look like, though? I mean, we see time and time again, like countries, organizations, like bring in that 4-day work week, and they're like, "Great, productivity went up, like fantastic."
Yeah.
But like, what to you is like, is it a completely flexible work structure where employees are like, well, I'll choose to work on these days, and maybe I work these hours on these days. Like, what to you is the ideal setup in the future?
This is sneaky. And right before we recorded, you were mentioning to me that, even at your workplace right now, the workload is collapsing onto this team of 3 people. Now, what's going to happen, and probably what is already happening, and this is not, an indictment of the leadership at your organization. I think that everybody is stressed and making quick decisions and not really fully thinking this through. But that portfolio is likely going to be absorbed by you, and you're going to step up and you're going to do a really good job, but you're going to be suffering in silence. You're going to be taking on these other people's portfolios, and your workload is going to increase from 50 hours of work a week to 60 hours of work a week, if not beyond. And the research shows time and again that the best way to manage burnout and to beat burnout is to bring your workload under 50 hours of work a week. This is very clear. Like the solution to beating burnout is so laughably obvious. We talk about meditation and yoga and improving your sleep and this app and that practice. I'm like, guys, no. Just help people have manageable workloads, because after 50 hours a week, the risk of burnout increases substantially. And after 60 hours of work a week, consistently, chronic unmanaged stress at 60 hours plus, it's a matter of when you're going to burn out, not if. So all of these practices that we're seeing right now, and especially with an upcoming election season, a lot of politicians are throwing ideas out there like 4-day work weeks. We're going to cut off emails after a certain hour, not addressing the fact that the work is still the same. The work itself is still growing. It's increasing. People are being expected to do more with less, and that term grinds my gears. When leaders say we need to do more with less, I wish everybody could say, for how long, though? Is it a temporary measure? We're happy to roll up our sleeves for the first couple of months in the pandemic, maybe a year to help you out. But if we're still doing this level of work 2 years into the pandemic, then we need to start looking at income inequality, look at wage stagnation, look at the fact that the great resignation is taking place. Like, don't even get me started, man. I get really riled up about this, especially when we see how well millionaires have fared during the pandemic. Microsoft put out a study, I think maybe 6 months ago, showing the difference of experience during the pandemic for subordinates and leaders. And as you can imagine, leaders are thriving. They're having a great time right now. Subordinates, on the other hand, are fed up. They're overworked, they're tired, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed. So how do we do this, man? What is the solution? Okay. This is a great corrective, in my opinion. There's an old model of leadership known as the dark triad of leadership qualities: psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. And these are subclinical traits, and I have them, you have them, every person has them. But certain leaders have figured out how to operationalize them. And they have risen to the highest possible ranks. I mean, think about Adam Newman in WeWork, Mark Zuckerberg in Facebook, Elizabeth Holmes in Theranos. These are very easy to point to examples. Travis Kalanick in Uber, examples of dark triad leaders who were able to achieve a lot of flash, a lot of growth and success. But then when you look to the level of detail of how their employees are faring at the company, you look at the anonymous reviews on Blind, Glassdoor, Indeed, it tells a very different story. The leadership that is needed now is that of Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, Brian Chesky of Airbnb, Dan Price of Gravity Payments. These are all examples of light triad leaders. So they have a different combination of traits, not necessarily subclinical. I think they're above the surface over here. Three things in particular: Kantianism, which is the belief that humans are ends unto themselves and not mere means. Then you have humanism, which is the belief in the fundamental dignity and value of every human being. And then faith in humanity, the belief that humans are good and worth developing, investing in, and saving. I think that if leaders were to lean into those three traits, it would naturally correct all of the other behaviors and allow them to make the right decision when it comes to simple things. I think we're making this too complicated. We're making the decision about returning to the office, hybrid work, and all of these innovations about work. We're getting hung up on the gimmicks. But if you get down to the level of treat these people like human beings, the answers become so obvious. Right? Is the answer 4 hours or 4 days a week in the office or 5 days a week in the office? Well, don't make that decision in a vacuum. If you truly care about your employees, you're going to involve them in the decision-making process. You're going to ask them naturally, if you are a light triad leader, how are you doing? What do you need? How can I help you to do your best work over here? While respecting that we have a mission that we're pursuing as an organization. And that's the dichotomy of leadership, right? There's a thing that is good for the mission, and there's a thing that is good for the people. And they're not always congruent. Sometimes a disproportionate focus on the needs of the mission comes at the expense of the needs of the people, and vice versa. Sometimes focusing extensively on the needs of the people comes at the expense of the needs of the mission. So that's where a leader needs to strike a delicate approach. But I would recommend to err on the side of the needs of the people. So I don't know if that's like as specific of an answer as you were hoping for, man. But I think that maybe what it could do for the listeners is give them a broad, a very integrated solution that has widespread application. Be more human. Lean into the light triad as a way to simplify the answers that you need for all of these newly emergent problems.
How do you respond to those people, and I know a few of them, who are workaholics, where they enjoy putting in those 60-hour work weeks, where they enjoy working on the weekends, where they feel as though there's something missing in their lives if they don't have that. How do you explain perhaps them not experiencing burnout, or maybe they are experiencing burnout, but they just don't know it?
Yeah. If you're a workaholic, that implies that you don't have any control over this. So I want to be sympathetic at first and encourage these people to define the word enough. What does the word enough mean for you? Because, you can love capitalism all you want, but I promise you capitalism is not going to love you back. Capitalism has no feelings. It just wants you to work harder. The hardest worker gets the biggest shovel. It is insatiable. There's nothing you cannot do enough in the structure in which we exist. And so the onus is on you to define what is enough. And if you don't define that, then the market will define it for you. And it will tell you that you're not perfect enough, you're not efficient enough, you're not progressive enough, you're not satisfied enough, you're not innovative enough. And I can say this with the utmost confidence as a former marketing and communications professional. My entire industry is designed to irritate your sense of self. It's designed to shatter your confidence and your self-esteem and say, hey, if you buy this toothpaste, if you buy this car, if you open this bank account, your problems will be solved. But of course, we know that that's not the complete answer. It might be an answer at a specific time, but it's not the complete answer. So for these workaholics, I would encourage you to figure out what you truly need to feel like yourself. And I guarantee you that it has very little to do with your work. And the exercise that I give people all the time is, imagine what you want people to say at your eulogy. When you're no longer on this planet, when you have your loved ones, your friends, your family, people whose lives you've impacted. And, if you are a workaholic, maybe think about customers, maybe think about the people that you serve, the end users. What would you want them to say about you when all is said and done? And then write that out, and then put that piece of paper away, and then come back to it the next day with a fresh set of eyes, and highlight the attributes, highlight the accomplishments, the characteristics. And I guarantee you that you're going to find less than 20% of what you've written down has anything to do with your work. It has everything to do with the way you make people feel, how you made the world a better place for them. Has very little to do with the report you're working on, the project that you're currently leading, the presentation you're putting together, and it has everything to do with the outcomes, not the outputs. So focus on the outcomes. What are the outcomes that you're hoping to be true from the work that you're doing? And then ask yourself, what would a calm version of this look like? Because if you're not approaching your work with a level of calmness, then that means to me that you are engaging with your work as a phoenix almost, right? You're hoping to burn bright in the service of this work and then fall into the ashes and be reborn again and again and go through that cycle of burning bright and burning out. But take it from a recovering overachiever, a former phoenix. First of all, we're not mythical creatures. We don't have this magical ability to be born back from the ashes. If you burn out, and I was very lucky to emerge with my health and wellness intact, I will tell you that's not the case for most people. Most people, in fact, one of the main reasons why I wrote the Burnout Gamble is because I discovered very shortly after I burned out that somebody else, I get his name wrong all the time. Is it Eretz Morhart or Moritz Earhart? One of the two. I can't remember the specificities around it, but he was my age. He went through what I went through with my early burnout experience, except he died. And that is far too common. Like, the UN stat speaks for itself. 2.8 million people dying every year because of work-related stress. And if that's too big of a number to comprehend, let's bring it down even smaller. 2,000 to 3,000 people die every day in China from working too hard. Like, that is, and it's so bad in Southeast Asia that they have region-specific terms to describe the very alarmingly normal trend of death by overwork. Like, this is a thing. You can love capitalism. Capitalism won't love you back. It wants your soul. It wants you to die for a paycheck.
So what is it like if you're working too hard and you're approaching burnout? Like, does it have an impact on your, like, physically? What is it impacting in your body for you to perhaps not make it or for you to pass away? Like, what is it impacting?
It's impacting everything. It's impacting your sleep. It's impacting your food. I mean, how detailed do you want to go here, man? Like, if you're listening to this and you're struggling with irritable bowel syndrome, for instance, or brain fog, or, you're waking up in the middle of the night, not getting good sleep, there's a good chance that you are experiencing burnout, that you are on the burnout cycle, that you are going through the stages of burnout. So don't dismiss these things as, I'm sick or, I ate something weird. If this is happening chronically and you're not managing it, it is evidence, it is a symptom of a deeper illness, in my opinion. Burnout is to stress what a runny nose is to a cold. It's just a symptom. And I use burnout as the keyhole through which to look at a larger problem, which is an imbalance in modernity. In the experience of modern life, we haven't come to terms with the role of stress in day-to-day life. We've been told that stress is a necessary evil, that this is the thing you gotta do to get to do the thing that you want to do. But I'm calling bullshit on that. I think that has been fed to us by the culture industry, by the powers that be, to make us, a malleable workforce that doesn't question, or that doesn't, forget about question, that can't even dream of a better version of this. And this is where the optimist in me, coming back to your earlier question, man, the optimist in me thinks that we have been gifted through COVID-19 and this temporary series of lockdowns, the ability to imagine a better version of work. One that is respectful, one in which, we might come to the office, but there better be a damn good reason why we should come to the office. What's the point of coming to the office if we're just going to put our headphones on and work remotely anyways? So can leadership design a more intentional way to use the office? Can they reimagine the space physically so that it's more conducive to collaboration? Can we structure in some opportunities for us to discuss and brainstorm and be in those settings that might produce more collaborative work? Do we need to be there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5? Or is this just a way for the wardens to keep their eyes on the prisoner? Like, we have to be prisoners. We just have to be honest with ourselves. And I think that this goes both ways. I think there needs to be bi-directional compassion. Leaders need to be compassionate with subordinates and vice versa. But I think leaders need to also be critical with their subordinates. But for the first time in my lived experience, now we have the subordinates en masse able to look critically at the leadership apparatus. And that fills me with a lot of excitement. Because I know that a lot of leaders are listening to this right now thinking, holy shit, I can't fake it anymore. I can't pretend to be a good leader. It's very obvious that I'm not a good leader. And that's fine. Let this be a wake-up call for you. This has been a wake-up call for everybody. And as a leader, you can choose now how you step into the new epoch of work. Think about the pandemic as a portal. And that's not even my metaphor. It's Arnold who said that historically, pandemics have forced people to break apart with the old world and imagine their world anew. This pandemic is no different. It is a portal between one world and the next. You can leave the dark triad of leadership behind in the BC world, in the before coronavirus world, and you can bring the light triad traits into this new one. But time's ticking, man, and I don't know if we're having the level of conversation that I think needs to be had, which is why I'm so grateful for you, Abdullah, for giving me a platform to rant on share these thoughts with your listeners. So thank you. I think that maybe this is not the necessary step, but it is a necessary step.
Yeah, no, I think you make some pretty fascinating points, and it's hard to argue with a lot of the things you're saying just because I think we see them play out. And I think what you're doing is you're just taking stock, and it's just because you're so far into it is that you have this perspective where you're like, look, this seems to be working and this clearly doesn't. And these are the dangers associated with, these behaviors or these perhaps certain practices or processes that we have in place that when they do play out, they create these issues that have now become a concern where people are taking them a lot more seriously and we're having some more serious conversations around them. I think it makes total sense. I wanted to come back. You brought up a lot of really good points when you were speaking. One of the things that you also speak about is productivity, is building productivity. And those are very closely, or productivity and burnout are very closely related, right? If you're experiencing burnout, you clearly have there's clearly an issue with your productivity, or there could be, right? So how do you...
Sometimes it's causal and sometimes it's, got you.
So how do you, what are your thoughts? And, this is something that I could benefit from as well, is do you have certain tips in terms of how to perhaps either maintain your productivity or in the face of change, workplace change, how do you either maintain it or if there are certain tips or tricks that you have to perhaps maybe even increase it?
Oh man, so many. How much time do we have?
As much time as you need.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to give you a few of my favorite ones over here. Yeah. So I talked about this concept of defining what enough means for you as a human being, but let's operationalize this within the workplace, specifically focusing on optimizing productivity. Productivity isn't about more hours at work. It's about doing more work with the hours that you do have. It's about getting the most value out of the units of time available to you. And ultimately, it's about producing the thing, right? Productivity isn't about busy work. It's not about meetings in your calendar and things that you're checking off on your to-do list. You could do that all day. I did that during the year that I burned out. In 2014, if you look at my calendar, it was jam-packed. I had meetings all day, every day. I was checking things off my to-do list. But when I look back at the year that I burned out and I think about what did I move the needle on, I can't think of a single thing. I can't think of a single priority that I was able to get to completion. There was a lot of things activated at the same time that were at different levels of completion, 50% here, 50% there, 75% there. But in terms of things done, nothing was really done. And even if something was somewhat done, it wasn't the right thing. So productivity is really about eliminating distractions, minimizing the things that cause persistent stress, and assembling boundaries. And one of my favorite tactics when it comes to assembling boundaries is giving out respectful no's. We have made yes our default answer to everything, and that's the wrong way to approach it. And I think a lot of the reason why I in the past used to make yes my default answer was because of how I was socialized. I was raised the son of immigrant parents. I thought that every opportunity I had was a gift. I was being done a favor. I was so lucky to be employed and that I owed a yes to everybody. And, that is a surefire way to burn out because if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And if you're not taking stock of what you're saying no to, probably it's coming at the expense of your health and well-being. Your time, energy, and attention is actually finite. So I have made no my default answer, but I don't make it a disrespectful no, even in the negotiation process for this podcast, right? I knew that in I saying yes to this and in you saying yes to this, we're both saying no to other priorities right now. So we had to be very intentional about making the time for this opportunity. I'm so glad that we did. But God forbid if I had to say no to you, Abdullah, I would have said it in a respectful way. I'd have said, hey man, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this podcast. After further consideration, I don't think I'll be able to make the necessary time for this because I'm working on A, B, and C, and I've got a wedding to plan. Is it possible that we do this another way? Can we, reduce the time to do this podcast instead of an hour? Can we do half an hour? And if that doesn't work, can I recommend some other people in my network? So it's not just like a hard no. I'm not just saying, hey, Abdullah, sorry, no, can't do it. Because you would have thought, who is this asshole? And that's not a good look for me. It's not helpful to you. I really want to help you, but I can't do the podcast with the terms that we initially agreed upon. So let me offer you this third masterstroke, an alternative, so that, I'm not depleting social capital in this negotiation process. In fact, you're thinking, hey, Hamza came in clutch for me. So give out respectful no's and make that your default answer. Embrace the fear of missing out. Actually, embrace the joy of missing out and reject the fear of missing out. It's okay. It's okay to turn down that invitation to be part of that committee at work where you're going to add absolutely no value. It is okay to turn down that 15th request for an informational interview, especially if the person hasn't tailored their response to you on LinkedIn. It is okay to turn down that birthday party. It is okay to turn down that date. Make time for yourself. Protect your time, energy, and attention. So that would be my first tactic. The second one I would say is create some non-negotiables in your calendar. We make time in our calendar for meetings and for transit and for other priorities, but then we find ourselves at the end of the day looking at our workday and thinking, what did we get done? All I did today was have meetings. And now here I am at 6 p.m. finally starting to do work. Well, go in there into your calendar and start to book meetings with yourself. Block out time to do the work. I have been very fortunate, especially in the latter stages of my career, where I would just insist on no meetings in the morning. I would say, guys, I am at my most productive between the hours of 6 in the morning till noon. So between 6 and noon, no meetings. If you want to meet with me, it's going to happen after lunch. Now, I was very lucky to be a leader and to be more senior in my career where I could do that. But earlier in my career, I had to keep my calendar as open as possible. But I would then book in these bogus meetings, regardless. And people would say, hey, can you make time? I'm like, hey, man, I'm sorry. I got this meeting on Friday. And if they really insisted, then I would be flexible. But I had to make no my default answer paired with these non-negotiables. And the non-negotiables should correspond to ways in which you gain energy as well. Think about your energy as divided into 4 buckets, right? Your spiritual energy. Why are you doing all of this? Your mental energy. How well can you focus? Your emotional energy. How happy are you? And your physical energy. How healthy are you? And make sure that you have non-negotiables in your calendar that correspond to energy replenishment for each of those things. So, for example, the gym is in my calendar every single day, Monday to Friday. I go to the gym at the same time. That corresponds to my physical energy. I have meditation in there, reading, gratitude, journaling, eating lunch, eating dinner. I have these things in my calendar because they are non-negotiable. They're fixed costs. If we think about our calendar as a reflection of our priorities, then it's very much like a budget. And just like you wouldn't let me reach into your bank account and take out money, why are we letting each other reach into our respective calendars and take time? So that would be my 2 things for the listeners over here. Respectful no's and then non-negotiables. And I could go on and on. I could give you so many more, but maybe we'll do another episode of the podcast. And I'd love to have you on Ideas into Action when we do it, when we restart in January.
I'd love to be on, but I think your points make all the sense in the world. And again, so helpful and so beneficial to have both of those. And I think the way you put it in terms of the respectful no, as well as the non-negotiables, I feel as though a lot of people and maybe it's just the people that I'm surrounded with, but I see a lot of people actually use the latter, the
Yeah,
non-negotiables. But the respectful no's, I think that can get a little bit tricky sometimes.
of course.
I think you can become really good at it depending on how you position it and the way you position it. Of course, like that, I think that's more of a respectful yes, more so than it is a
More than a
respectful
no. Yeah,
no. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
Makes sense. And if you put together enough respectful no's, eventually it becomes like a macro no. So be careful not to just dole out so many to the same person that they stop inviting you and asking you to do things, unless that's your goal, right? For example, if you're the friend in your friend group that doles out respectful no's for every opportunity to meet up, eventually you're going to be not asked to come to anything, right? So just be mindful of how many no's you've been handing out, and then break the pattern every once in a while.
yeah, that makes sense. I think it goes back to doing everything in moderation, right? Like you can't
Yeah,
do. Um, I did want to ask you just one other thing, which I think is fascinating, and I think would be beneficial. And you had spoken a little bit about this earlier, or actually, let's switch gears.
sure.
I'd like to hear about what your experience was publishing a book by yourself. Your first book that you
Ooh.
published yourself. What was that process like? Was it horrible? Was it something that you sort of like enjoyed?
Yeah,
What was
yeah.
that?
And because my most recent book, Leadership Reinvented, I went with a publisher. I have two vastly different experiences. The reason why I published the first book by myself was because I was so emotionally invested in the prose, the stories that were in this. Like I had a story that I really wanted to tell with a sense of urgency. Not to say that I didn't with the new book, but I knew that what I was going to say in the Burnout Gamble was a gamble in and of itself. Like these are not popular ideas over here. With Leadership Reinvented, there's been so much that has been said about leadership that if you're playing within certain bounds, you'll be okay. But with the Burnout Gamble, it was truly incendiary at the time. It was just taking like a flamethrower to society itself. It was looking at government. It was looking at big business. It was looking at Big Brother as the causes of why you and I burn out. And so I wanted to have as much creative freedom with this as possible, but I also was feeling a lot of pressure to go to market quickly. And I didn't want to go through the traditional publishing process because I had been hearing up until that point how much time it was going to take. So the desire for maximum creative freedom mixed with the desire to get the book to market as soon as possible led me to go to the indie route. And I think I've always been like an indie-minded creator. I've always thought that you don't actually need the gatekeepers. You can go to market, and I've done this with my own podcast. I've done this with my blogs and newsletters. Like it's part of my DNA, I think, as an entrepreneur myself, and also somebody who's had the privilege of watching my parents navigate the immigrant experience. I think that immigrant hustle was very much built into me. I thought to myself, screw Penguin,
How's
Scholastic, Random House, all these publishers. I can do this myself. And I did it myself, and I regretted it, man. First of all, let me tell you this. Unless you're a New York Times bestselling author, you are not going to make money off of publishing. Your book does not make a lot of money. Now, it's been a couple of years, and the book has eventually paid for itself, but I made all of my money from all of the results of having published the book. It elevated my profile as an author, and therefore as a speaker, and as a thought leader. It became this nice complement to bundle into speaking engagements and all of that. So, I was able to recover my costs fairly quickly, but from raw book sales, that took a long time, man. Because I had sunk into the production of the book, the marketing, the photography, artwork, distribution, etc. I think nearly between $15,000 to $20,000 of my own money had gone to the production of the book. But when I published the first edition, man, I got so many complaints of spelling and grammar and syntax errors because I cheaped out. I hired my editor off of Upwork. And I negotiated at nickel and dime, thinking I got to conserve costs, but I got what I paid for. It goes back to the adage: if you think hiring a professional is expensive, wait till you hire an amateur. So I had to hire another editor and then a third editor to edit that editor's work of the first editor. So I learned my lesson having published this the first time. It was a lot of fun. I wouldn't change a single thing about it. I'm very proud of the work that was produced. But having then gone through the second time of publishing Leadership Reinvented, man, this publisher, shout out to Callisto, took the friction out of this. They front-loaded all the costs of distribution, production, market research, etc. They allowed me to just be a writer. Like, I felt spoiled when writing the second book. The first book took me 4 years to write part-time. The second book took me 3 months. All I had to do was just sit down and write. I had to do nothing else. They took care of everything else. But for all of the aspiring authors listening to this, the trade-off was that now they own the lion's share of the book. So if you buy the Burnout Gamble, I get almost all of the money minus production costs. If you buy Leadership Reinvented, the equation is flipped. I make pennies on the dollar. But I'm proud of both books equally, but very different writing experiences, man.
That's awesome. And yeah, I definitely do want to read the Burnout Gamble. It's definitely one of the books that I want to read. I do have another one that I have to get to before it. And like it's like just prioritizing and making sure like
Of
you
course,
have
man.
the things that you want to get done. But like it's definitely I think it'd be an interesting read for sure. And I totally agree. I think it's going to be. I think where the issue of burnout is going to be, it's just going to continue to grow. And I think we'll probably reach a point where I think we'll have to make some pretty tangible changes to the way we work. I don't think we're there yet. It's just my personal opinion. But I think, like we all know individuals who have gone through it. You know, a lot of us have experienced it for ourselves. Yeah, I think it's you're definitely in the right space, and I think your expertise will probably continue to play a pretty important role in the future as well.
I hope so, man. And let me, man, I got to give you the utmost props over here. Like you are, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Like, this is a true honor. I'm really glad we got to connect. I have been doing all of the talking over here, and that's a testament to you as a very finely attuned podcast host. You know the right questions to ask, how to guide the energy, the flow of the conversation. As much as I've been answering, I've also, as a podcast host, been taking notes of how you've been conducting this, man. So kudos to you. But to your point about like this being an important topic and we're navigating the future of work and talking about burnout now in a way that it should be talked about, I think that this exchange is part of that. Because 5 years ago, if I were to share this idea or these series of ideas with anybody, I wouldn't get the same response. I wouldn't get the same reaction. But it's because of people like yourself who have the platform, who have the desire to empower their listeners and their followers, who invite me to the podcast and then ask me questions like this. Like, this is how I think it happens. I don't know how else we're supposed to get the message out there because the media apparatus is working overtime to prevent this awareness from happening at the level that it needs to. It doesn't want to talk about burnout. I think it's counterproductive to the engine of capitalism if we become awakened as a populace. So thank you, man, for giving me the opportunity and the space to share these ideas. But beyond that, for as a peer, validating me and making me feel like I'm not crazy, that I'm not losing it. But these are real things that are felt by real people, man. So thank you. This has been a tremendous honor.
No, the pleasure's been all mine, and I know I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got a ton of stuff going on. You've also got the wedding to plan, so I know we're just at about an hour. It's been great having you on. I would have loved to have spoken about the fights in the UFC. That's something I'm
Can we do
passionate
2
about.
more minutes on that and just like quickly
Let's
trade
do it.
some top level thoughts on that?
Let's do it.
You watch both fights? You watch UFC and boxing as well?
I watched the highlights of the Canelo fight, if that's the one you're referring to.
Yeah. The main event.
But I watched the entire UFC card. So
what were your thoughts on the card results? The main card. Let's start with Chandler and Gaethje.
So I had Gaethje going into that fight. I thought he was going to be able to pull it off. I did think the fight between Rose and Weili Zhang, that perhaps Weili would have been able to pull it off. She wasn't able to. I think she was just a little too hesitant.
Yeah, and never let it go to the judges, man, because whoever scored that 10-9, I was like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
3 rounds?
Yeah. I don't know. I felt as though that was a lot closer. That fight was a lot closer.
A lot closer. I thought Weili had the first 3 rounds in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I was really shocked to hear the judges' scorecard. I thought to myself, were we watching the same fight?
Yeah. I don't know. I thought it would have been maybe a draw, even though those are rare.
Right.
And then the main event, I had Kamaru going in. I thought he was going to be able to pull it off. I just thought it was a horrible stylistic matchup for Kobe. Yeah.
I feel bad because without Kamaru Usman, Kobe would be the head of the division. He happens to be existing at the time where Kamaru's in his way. He's going to be, oh man, I feel bad for him. He's like Daniel Cormier in some ways, right?
Yep.
You just happen to be in the game at your prime while John Jones is there. That's how I feel about Colby Covington. And I hate that he had to put on this gimmick and become this sort of like Trumpian MAGA supporter over there when far from. Like you've seen the same interviews that I have behind the scenes. Like he's actually such a nice guy, such a sweetheart. That's the furthest thing from his character. His coaches have said that. The people closest to him have said that. But this is what he feels like he has to do to sell the tickets and to be in the UFC. And he's such a good fighter, man. So talented. He's got such a great engine on him.
He's a beast. He's a beast.
He's
and
a beast.
Again,
such a beast.
And again, like that fight, I felt as though the first 2 rounds, the second one clearly went to Kamaru because he knocked him down. Yeah. But I felt as though the later rounds were more Kobe doing the damage. And you see Kamaru getting rocked a couple of times. He definitely got a little he definitely got rocked a couple of times. And I felt as though I wanted more of that fight. I didn't feel as though like that fight was a clear victory. I don't know. For some reason, I didn't feel that way.
Yeah, it wasn't the emphatic victory that I was hoping for. Man, we got to do this again. We got to have like a fight companion.
I would love that. I would love that.
That'd be fun, man. That'd be a lot of fun. I don't know how we would do that, the mechanics of it, but I think with both of our minds combined, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to have a live stream going on, order some wings, and make it happen.
Yeah, I'd be down. And one last MMA question: Have you heard of Hamza Chimaev?
Have I heard about it, man? I'm so riveted by this ascent. He's only received one significant strike in his career.
In one significant strike in the last four fights. Yeah.
I didn't even know that stat was even possible. I didn't know that was a potential stat line that you could develop as a fighter. I am fascinated by this. He put on a clinic with the last fight. He was just talking to Dana White the whole time.
Yeah.
He's just demolishing this guy and talking to Dana White, negotiating his next fight. This is who we're going up against. Like the UFC, I love. Joe Rogan once said that the UFC is an evolving, mixed martial arts is a work in progress. It's an experiment that changes with every new innovation into the fight. And I think like the contingent of fighters that have come out of the Balkans, Dagestan, Chechnya in the case of Hamza, are introducing something new to the game. It's, I want to say the word, but this is a PG podcast over here, but they're introducing a style of wrestling that is very, it's going to be very problematic. I don't see how Conor McGregor, that epoch of fighter, transitions into this new one. It's not just about boxing and jiu-jitsu anymore. You're wrestling, but a very specific style of wrestling needs to be implemented in order to succeed and thrive in the UFC.
Yeah, and you see it with some of the other fighters too, right? Like on that same card, Islam Makhachev, like destroyed Dan Hooker.
Ooh.
Destroyed him. Yeah.
And Dan Hooker was a hero. That's when I got into UFC. He was the guy, right? Like he was coming out of that school of fighter that I thought to myself, wow, like this is the paragon of the sport. But Islam made easy work of him, man. And it's just so cool to see. And not only that, like from just a mixed martial arts perspective, but also from a representation perspective, as a South Asian, as somebody who identifies as a Muslim, to see myself represented at the highest level of that sport is so cool, man. I've never had anything like it. So I'm really excited for what the future holds. Comes out, it's going to be a very tough code to crack, and I'm very curious to see who is going to crack it.
Yep, I agree 100%. Okay, so I think we're at time. I could go on and on about the UFC.
Yeah, man, this is a lot of fun.
But again, extremely happy that you came on. I thought I think the content was fantastic. And it's just made me even more sort of excited to read the Burnout Gamble. I think it's definitely going to be a good read. And for everybody that tuned in, thank you for tuning in. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google, and YouTube. And yep, I will see you on the next one.